Hey, everybody. This is another podcast, RPG Limit Breaks, and we will be discussing the Mana series this time. And we have two very qualified individuals. If you would like to introduce yourself, we'll start with Crow.
Sure. Hello, I'm Crow. I am known for speedrunning Final Fantasy Adventure and Secret of Mana. Final Fantasy Adventure, I do the Warpless category as a mage. Talk about that later. Secret of Mana, I do primarily one player, one controller, which you would think would be the default, but we'll talk about why it's not later.
And I am Falexx. I've been pulled out of the speedrunning nursing home to come by and talk about this. I've been vanished for many years, but my first kind of non-basic game in '93 was Secret of Mana when I was 6, and it's been a very important series for me ever since then. And as far as really in depth on the game, Secret of Mana and Legend were two things that I speedrun quite frequently, and it was just a big part of my life for a while.
It's good to hear. Good to hear. Yeah, I started way back when with Mega Man X, so I had a few years of inactivity, found Limit Break, and came on by. So I think a lot of people have that experience where they've been in and out for a bit. So I guess let's start off. Honestly, I know just a little bit about the Mana series, just enough to be dangerous and spread misinformation. But can you guys kind of explain the series so far? Because I know it's very long, has a very huge amount of entries, but they're not consistent like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've got a list up here, so I'll just kind of read off of there. And the names I'm going to be giving here, these are all of the Western names for the series. In Japan, the games are Seiken Densetsu instead of Name of Mana. So we've got Final Fantasy Adventure was the English name of the first game of the series. Then it went Secret of Mana, Trials of Mana, which never had a Western release, was otherwise known as Seiken Densetsu 3, just because that was the Japanese name for it. Legend of Mana is not considered a mainline game of the series, but it's still quite good. And there are some remakes of all of these. Sword of Mana came out around that time. Then after that, there was a flurry of a bunch of things that all weren't super mainstream. Children of Mana, Friends of Mana, Dawn of Mana, Heroes of Mana, Circle of Mana, Rise of Mana. All came out in kind of a period of time, but honestly, I don't know a whole lot about much of those. And then after that, more recently, there's been a series of remakes. Adventures of Mana is the renamed remake of Final Fantasy Adventure. And it's very good. It's a mobile game. Then there's the Collection of Mana finally had Trials of Mana in it, and finally we had a real name for it. And then there was a remake of Secret of Mana, not very well received. Remake of Trials of Mana, which was very well received, awesome game. And then there was a mobile game, those short-lived Echoes of Mana, and finally Visions of Mana came out less than a month ago, I think it is at this point. So yeah. That brings us to now. Quite a few games spanning all the way back from the original, 4-color Game Boy all the way up to now. So the series has changed quite a bit along the way.
Okay. So the Mana kind of has a unique playstyle, very distinct and different from the other main RPGs. I think it was more of an action-based one from the very start, where a lot of the major RPGs are turn-based, like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, like I said earlier. What is it about these different releases that have different playstyles over the years that specifically draw you to those entries versus the more modern ones when you're doing runs? Alex?
So with the series, it is almost entirely would be considered more of the action RPG style, with the exception of the small block of the ones I don't remember. It was either, I believe it's Heroes, is more of a strategy RPG rather than action. Everything else is just more fast paced, and the reason that I keep coming back to these is they're fast paced, they're fun, they're engaging. It's not something that you really have time to sit around and wait. You're always engaged with something. It just makes it fun. That initial feeling, it always takes me back to whenever I played Secret. And at the time, I'm being 6 years old when I played it, I was always playing side scrollers or other games, and having just a world that you're exploring. And that's a big part of it. Is for the first few games in a while, they were all mostly isometric and looking down and more expansive. And it made me think about like Link to the Past. That was the other major game from that time in my life that was huge for me. But it was just the visuals, and there's kind of the cutesy style to it, and all merged into something where you're fast paced, you're going. It's not really button mashing. You have to actually, in earlier games, kind of time your hits. You do have to wait just a little bit and plan. It mixes so many different elements of what makes just an interesting and tactical style of gameplay that's very unique to the series. And even the more modern entries have become more just traditional action games to fit with the times. So the older games they have a unique feel to them that I can't really think of any other games other than like Secret of Evermore that really have a typical style.
Yeah, that's a game that's crossed my path more than a few times due to being part of the staff with Limit Break. We had a very consistent Secret of Evermore runner in the past that was just like, I couldn't escape it. I'm like, well, I guess we're playing Secret of Evermore today. So Crow, kind of the same question for you. What is it about like the play styles that draw you to specific entries versus other ones in the series? And if you can elaborate on that, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. As far as like one game versus another, the first game of the series, Final Fantasy Adventure, was in a lot of ways it plays like a Zelda clone, right? It's like a RPG take on Zelda 1 specifically. A lot of the way movement works, where you're sort of confined to a half-tile grid with your movement that is present there. They just replaced bombs with Mattocks. You get packs of 7 of them, and you swing your Mattock 7 times, and it's just gone. You have to purchase keys before showing up into dungeons.
Pre-Minecraft days.
Yep.
Oh no, my pick is broken.
Yep, exactly. So it from there, the games all kind of progress towards kind of a Beats of Rage sort of thing, or Streets of Rage, or any of those sorts of like arcade style fighting systems. Yeah. The once you get to like Legend of Mana, feels very much like that in terms of how combat goes. But aside from the combat, a lot of the games it's about resource management. You have especially if you're speedrunning, you don't want to stop just sleeping it in. So you've got a certain amount of HP, MP to deal with. You've got items that will destroy various aspects of the terrain, whether it's a axe that chops down trees, or your Mattocks that you've got limited amounts of. It's just a big network of stuff to optimize. So if we look at specifically Secret of Mana, probably the one I've come back to the most in terms of speedrunning, that one, it has a thing where each character of the 3 characters you can play as individually levels up their skill with each of the 8 different weapon types you can carry, and each of the 8 different elements of magic that you can cast. And so it winds up, if you actually care about using magic, which depending on your category, either you will or you won't, you have to map out, okay, when am I going to level up this spell, that spell, the other spell? How high do I need those levels to get? Is it actually worth spending the time to do that? There's just a big network of things to worry about as you're going through. And make no mistake, even with some beneficial glitches that are available in each of the games that I run, they are real hard. And most of the games of the Mana series are pretty brutal, especially if you're going through it in a, speedrunner, brinksmanship sort of fashion. But even otherwise, just going through casually, it does not hold your hand very much.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that I kind of take for granted, since I run more modern action RPG stuff, a lot of those either have difficulty settings, so it's either easy, normal, hard. But I think a lot of people that only play modern stuff will somehow forget is that these early titles do not have a difficulty selection. It's just, nope, it's hard. That's all you get. You better account for it. Versus some of them where it gets set it to easy and be like, I don't need to grind levels. No, you're going to want to grind those. So I guess we'll get a little bit into the Mana series itself. I know we chatted about it a bit before the actual show. And you pointed out that there's kind of an OG versus a remake series. More so that like the play style between each kind of evolves and changes as a kind of a set of series occurs, versus like the Final Fantasy adventure and like the Super NES stuff where it kind of has the charge and leveling up weapon mechanic, and then you kind of get to the more modern ones where it's a little bit more action based. Can we explore that kind of comparison and contrast, Pro?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So with the beginning couple games of the series, Final Fantasy Adventure, Secret of Mana, it does very much feel in the lines of like Zelda-ish. But even just between those two, the differences are extreme. So Secret of Mana, probably the most punishing aspect of it is whenever anything takes damage, that character gets knocked to the ground or is just going through ow, I just got hurt animation. And you don't get to do anything if you're controlling that character while that's going on. And that winds up kind of dictating how that game plays out. Optimal play is usually to swap to another character as soon as your current character gets hit and try to bail yourself out that way. But as things go on, like Trials of Mana felt, at least the original version of it, the Super Famicom one, feels much more like a RPG than like an action RPG like the rest of the series, because dodging away from enemy attacks isn't really a thing. For the most part, you kind of set up how you're going to fight, and then it's a resource war for which side falls first. But then if we take a look at the remakes of those, Adventures of Mana, very faithful remake to the original. They changed all the boss fights because, like, fundamentally the way the bosses worked wouldn't have made sense with 3D graphics going on. But aside from that, like, just the exact design of the game is pretty much there, just with a slightly different engine making it work. Secret of Mana also feels very similar, although the game feels a little slippery. But again, those two are extremely confined to how the originals worked. Then if you move over to Trials of Mana, that was a complete redo. Just fundamentally different game design. It is a full-on modern 3D action RPG, conforms to a lot of the ideas you would expect from a game made these days, and it was done very well. And there was also a remake, just a remaster of Legend of Mana as well. Also very straightforward, just upscaling basically for the most part. I'm sure there's a few other little changes I don't know about. I haven't played it myself. And then just a little bit ago, Visions of Mana came out, and it follows very closely in the footsteps of Trials of Mana. I haven't played all the way through it yet, but it does make things in combat especially a lot more complicated, and there's a lot more just general stuff to do out and about in the world, things to motivate you to take a look and see what's around each corner. So that much it's done very well. So that's just kind of a rundown of the series, at least as far as I know it. Again, there's kind of a block in the middle of games I'm just not really familiar with, but that's what I know.
Yeah, I think with the like originals versus like remake version of it, you have kind of different eras with the Mana series, and I'd say the first is going from Adventure to Legend, which is from 91 to 99. Then you have Sword as a remake of the original, or totally just a different design, but it is still kind of the same general idea.
A different plot, even.
Yeah. And you have this whole. They really tried to cash in on the Mana series in 2006 and 2007, and it crashed and burned. I don't know how well Children, Friends, and Heroes performed, but Dawn it pretty much killed the series for a while. And then you have a few games that we didn't get in the West. I know nothing about Circle and Rise, but whenever you get to the remakes, a big thing with the Mana series, I would say, is it has always been something that is kind of in tune with new trends. The series has evolved very well, and as new action games have come out, that's Secret of Mana, everything else, very similar to action games of the time. Dawn tried to be like the heavy physics systems, and really had a very interesting physics system that many games had at the time. It just didn't do it very well. And the remakes, I feel, didn't try to capture that. They tried to really go back to just an old feel. And while Adventures of Mana was very nice, Secret of Mana, as much as Secret of Mana is my favorite game, the remake really felt like they didn't try to be innovative. They didn't try to modernize the game. They're just like, all right, here's the old game with a new coat of paint, but still some of the same bugs and problems the original had, just with a new coat of paint. And it did not work well, and you can tell that they went to the drawing board and said, hey, we need to make sure Trials is at least something decent, and they did that. It is a modern game. It's the story, characters, music, it's all the original, but you no longer have something that was not even emulating anything that was on the Super Nintendo. It is a whole new modern action game. And I'm glad they did that, because the series was always very innovative, and those remakes were not until Trials came out.
Yeah, I think the basic game design of Final Fantasy Adventure lends itself more to kind of just a basic run through of, okay, here's the way that the game works. Let's just redo it, and that kind of works. Secret of Mana, the way everything flows together was really specific to exactly how things would work on the Super Nintendo. And as soon as you change the engine behind it at all, it does feel very weird on the kind of slippery 3D world that the remake got. It's still good, fun gameplay if you're willing to stomach some of the weirdness of it, but you can also just get the original, and that's fine.
Okay. So there are quite a bit of differences, like we talked about gameplay wise. The ones that you guys come back to the most, what are the gameplay loops and gimmicks that you find much more entertaining to the point where you're willing to speedrun it over and over again, rather than, say like Visions or Trials, the more modern ones where they're still fun, but they're not like, this hits the spot for a speedrun. We'll start with you, Alex.
So a big thing for me back when I was speedrunning was I would like games that had variation and a bit of randomness. I was never a person that I wanted to speedrun a game where every time it came in, the time frame was, every run was within 5 seconds of each other. Everything was static. I liked things that had some degree of randomness to it. Secret of Mana and Legend of Mana, both they're very static, but there were times where if you didn't do something absolutely just dead on exact as you did the previous run, things will be very different, and you need to adapt and change. And that was something that's very important to me, is being able to adapt to something on the fly. That's really what kept me rolling with it. Is I don't want to be just set into, hey, play perfectly and everything's always going to be the same, but more of, hey, do you know how to react to this situation? And that's, both games have done that very well, and that scratched that itch for me. But it's been, I was trying to think of what about them really felt unique for me when speedrunning, but honestly, I then got to the point where I realized it's been over 6 years since I've done a run of either one of them, and I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, I feel you with that sometimes. You're like, man, I really love the Mega Man X series. When was the last time I did a speedrun? You look at the leaderboard, you're like, oh.
Yeah, it has been a while.
Yeah. So what about you, Crow? I know we talked a little bit about like the leveling up system and kind of how to route that stuff before, but if there's some other things that draw you into your specific speedrun of choice.
Yeah, so a couple of more things to bring up. One is the glitches. You don't have to play any of these games with glitches, but as it turns out, like Secret of Mana especially, that is the speedrun that I've put the most time into overall, by probably a significant margin over the years. There are a lot of extremely powerful glitches that either let you skip large sections of the game or defeat bosses in 1 or 2 hits or any of that sort of thing. But they're not just free wins where you happen to know the correct combination of buttons to place in the weird spot. They are all extremely execution heavy. There's a lot of weird stipulations on how they work. So, for example, over the course of a one controller run, I'm likely to start running out of fairy walnuts, which is what you use to replenish your magic. How do you replenish fairy walnuts? Do you take the trek over to an item shop and buy them? Of course not. We're speedrunning. So what do? Well, first of all, the first time we got fairy walnuts, we tricked the game into giving us 3 stacks of them by selling a non-existent item and causing it to think that that's a blat. After we do that, then we cause ourselves to have exactly 2 fairy walnuts remaining. And then we put a character on a specific place on the screen relative to the camera, pause the game, have them equip a hat, throw it out, and now we have 8 of that item because magic. You have to know exactly where you're standing. Which item gets affected by this depends on where you're standing, and it like seeks to the right in the memory position based on where you started. So you kind of have to have an understanding of what that is and what's going to happen, or else you could actually remove items from other slots if you do that wrong. Meanwhile, you can, I play one controller for Secret of Mana, the most powerful version of the most powerful glitch for defeating enemies, the overcharge glitch. You typically would do, well, typically, depends on how you want to play, but the most popular way to do it is to have 2 controllers in your hand and juggle controlling 2 players at once so you can confuse the game about, so you can trade weapons and thereby confuse the game about what charge level you're supposed to be able to get your weapon up to. And then you attack someone with a level 100 attack whenever normally 8 is the max at end game. So then you defeat a boss in one hit in the early game and all that stuff. But
So 1 second. Speaking about the one controller thing, a lot of players do just use the one controller, but if you're familiar with it, a lot of people will have a second controller velcroed or taped or something upside down. It is, if you haven't seen that setup, it's a really cool thing to witness. And it's kind of interesting to think that people are actively controlling two characters, one with their fingers and with their thumbs. Sorry, I just I have a visual presentation of this.
Yeah, it is just cool. You don't have to even be doing it to see that it is obviously just a cool thing to do. And there's more than one way to do it. Some of them tape the controllers back to back. Some of them set one down in front of them and then the other in front. I actually used for my second controller, I used whenever I was toying around with this, a arcade stick style controller called the Super Advantage. So that way, I could use my, pinkies and ring fingers in order to handle that thing because the buttons were big enough for me to do that, while my thumbs and, index fingers were handling the main controller. A lot of different ways to do it. But if you're not doing that, one controller still has the capability of doing that, but you have to rely on your allies, the computer-controlled SNES AI. You have to depend on them to do the job for you.
Modern AI makes me mad. Please, no.
It is scary. Even if you're playing casually, you will many times over the playthrough get frustrated with how your allies cannot figure out how to get around a tree or whatever, and the camera will not let you scroll if you would be leaving one of your allies behind. So it is a big part of that run is mastering how do you get the AI who, if you're just looking at it at a glance, you're like, oh man, these things are such idiots. Why are they doing what they're doing? But they are computers. They're doing everything that they're doing for a specific reason. And if you're willing to take the time out to learn, okay, in this situation, if I do this, they'll do what I want them to do. If I do anything else, they're going to screw up in a variety of ways. So I like the chaos of it, right? Kind of harkening back to what Alex was just talking about, right? Over the course of a 2-3 hour run, stuff is going to go wrong, very wrong. And I like just how you go about picking up the pieces whenever it does.
The dynamic routing and learning how to deal with catastrophic failure.
Yes.
It's always a speedrunning aspect I've very much enjoyed, where you try to, okay, well, thing A didn't happen. What's plan C? Because B is already gone too.
Yes. And that's, for me, to the distinctions and speedrunning sense for Secret of Mana, I never did the one player, one controller, one player, two controller standard routes that most people are about. I was always more about trying to run games in a more as glitchless as possible type of run. And the big thing with Secret of Mana that I really, really liked was probably the biggest thing. It was never so much explaining, hey, this is why this trick is done. This is why we do this. The thing was always explained of why do you have glitchless in quotations in your title? And that's the fact that it came down to more of this is a spirit of the game. And that was the reason I liked glitchless runs when I was speedrunning is, while glitches are fun, I have no issue with glitches. I do glitch runs. The glitchless runs this is how I played the game when I was a kid. But now here we are 25 plus years later, and I'm better at video games now. And this is how well we can do with the game now. Secret of Mana was wonderful that because of the chaos. There is all kinds of things that can happen. You don't have the glitches to answer. You need to have a natural developer intended way of killing an enemy if you are fighting, but finding the way to do that optimally. It was so much fun. And I know whenever I originally had the idea of doing the glitchless route and trying to figure out, like, well, how do we do this without actually glitching the game? Secret is very unique in that it's very hard to play Secret of Mana without in some way
because
causing a glitch.
It glitches on its own, so it's more of a glitch less than a glitchless.
It's more becomes a how can we play the game without intentionally causing something that could be considered a full-on glitch rather than exploiting a system that is just you can't not break it as you play it. Yeah.
Glitches in general are a very fun gimmick, and the routing, speedrunning, I find kind of breaks into three different prongs, like of a trident. And there's the people that love the run, there's the people that love the routing, and then there's the people that like the breaking. Some people do all three, but there's so many factors in a speedrun that determine it, and that what you were talking about really hits on that, where it's like, I just want to run the game, but the glitches are cool. I'm just not interested in doing them. I've come and go. I see a lot of interesting stuff. Clipping through a wall is super fun. But then when you realize it's like 3 frame perfect inputs, you're like, I think I'll lose the 5 minutes and play it intended.
Yep.
Yeah, we had a joke in Secret of Mana. We found more glitches by trying to route out glitchless than by trying to find glitches intentionally.
Oops, I broke it again.
Yep.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense if you think about it, right? Like, if you're trying to speedrun the game in a way that you've kind of optimized, okay, this is what you do, and you're kind of refining that, you're going to keep doing the same thing more or less each time, but throw in the chaos of now I'm trying to make use of every resource that the game has in order to not get murdered because I'm trying to run through the game so underleveled and don't have anything else to fall back on. Now all the crazy stuff shows up because we're doing weird stuff.
Yeah. You're like, well, I can make this consistent. You're like, why did I clip out of bounds? Why did I clip out of bounds? Again.
Yep.
Oh boy. Well, that's fun. So before we carry on with the game stuff, I know one of the things that you two wanted to discuss were other things in the series, not just gameplay focused. I know a specific thing that came up was sound and the music design of these games, and you definitely mentioned that it would be a very big failing to not discuss that. But we can definitely discuss other things besides just the music. But what are the other parts of the series that you find interesting outside of just gameplay mechanics, specifically visual sound, stuff like that? Crow?
Actually, I want to start with Alex on the music part. I know that's a big thing for him. Let's go through that. I've got some other stuff to talk about afterward, but that is perfect. A big thing for the series generally, and I'm going to defer to him on that one.
Music is that is a very unique part of the Mana series. Is there's a lot of music that you can listen to that if somebody has played games in the series, if it's maybe from one of the games that you haven't listened to before or rather played, the Mana series has a very unique sound. It's very percussive. Mallets are a huge part of the music. There's most any Mana game that you listen to, the piano and the mallets, and usually at least some form of accompanying percussion is there, and it all has a very unique Mana style to it. You can listen to almost any soundtrack, and if you ask for recommendations for 2 or 3 songs from anyone who's played the games, I'm almost just guaranteed that 2 out of 3 of them, at least, if not all 3, are going to have some type of mallet line that is big for you. And mallets were huge for me in high school, and from middle school, high school, and the first few years at college. Marimba in particular was That was my main instrument. That was my very poor high school got a marimba. That was my baby. Anytime we took that somewhere, it was my job to guard that thing like it was a child. And I love playing it. I love the sound of it. I just love the instrument. And there's a lot of songs that are really use the marimbas. Even back in the more digital MIDI sound font of the Super Nintendo, there are a lot of those songs that you can tell were really made with a marimba or a xylophone in mind. And as the series has progressed into the modern era, the remakes, many of those songs are very mallet heavy. It's something that as you're playing through the games, whenever the music of a game, whether it's the Mana series or anything else, if the music is very similar, it helps the game have a similar style. The games do have a very similar visual aspect, similar enemies, but when you have all this with even different composers throughout many of them, they all kept this similar style of the percussion is a huge part. Mallets, remember, your percussive sounds need to be an important part of the series. And for someone who is very into percussion, into music in general, it's really nice seeing a series keep things static. With something, say, Final Fantasy, even throughout all of Uematsu's work in the first number of games, he has a very distinctive style that if you're listening for it, you really know it. But there's so much variation that you can listen to a couple of tracks from one Final Fantasy. It may not sound like anything else in the whole game, but then you go back to the main themes and the boss music, and you can go, if someone is at least a little bit trained into music, you go, oh, hold on, this sounds like Uematsu, or this sounds like a Final Fantasy song. That might take a little bit more work, but Mana series really keeps it together, and it gives a good feel of when you're playing something new. It's really nice to be like, oh yeah, this reminds me of these other games I played as a kid, and they do a very good job of that. And if you're into very percussion led songs, that's a very good series for that.
Yeah, music I think is one of those things that people don't like. Even myself, I don't notice it directly, and like I'll normally like turn it down so I can hear other audio cues and stuff. So it's because I learned a few bosses blindfolded for remake. Mm-hmm. One of my friends, her experienced gamer, was like, "No, you're turning that up on the marathon run." So some of those fights were a little bit harder than they needed to be. You hear it, you love it, and you don't go. It's like it's there. That's the beautiful thing about music is it has this beautiful track. You can listen to it without playing the game, but it doesn't like overstate itself. But it's also, if you hear that, like you're playing FE and you go do the harp check, you do twin harp, and you're like, I've heard this song before, but what? That's the mark of a really good song, where like even if you don't remember the name, you'd be like, that's got to be a Mana song, especially when it has that through line. It's one of those things that people don't realize how important it is, the sound design.
Yes,
and especially having a thumbprint in the sound design throughout the series is very interesting to hear.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. Any game that I play, unless it is a multiplayer or something like recently Deadlock, the first thing I do when I open the game up is I make sure the music slider is all the way to the right, and I'll turn everything else down 2 or 3 notches. It's a huge thing for me. But one thing I wrote this down specifically to mention is something the series has done, and I should have looked this up. I don't know if they have the same art designer that began, because I know like Final Fantasy has been very, very lucky with Amano doing all their concept art and everything. But when you see a Mana title screen, you see that tree and those vivid green colors, those pink flamingos, and the water beneath it, the clouds.
Yep.
All that is the same, but also when the title screen begins to come up and you get that piano, you get those soft strings, and you get those dominant cymbals. Those songs are all the same. The first couple of games are really the same song, just a little bit more advanced as the hardware advanced. But the those title screen songs are this, the wonderment and excitement and the power of mana right there in your face. And that's always a very big part. The title screen themes are always big, and something that almost always if you look at YouTube view numbers, one of the songs that many people come back to all the time is those main themes, because they are powerful. They are very similar to each other. They're reminiscent of, hey, this is the Mana series as a whole. So that has been the title imagery, and the music has been something that when you turn that game on, all right, this is it. This is the world of Mana right here.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely will say, like, turning down the music is definitely like a criminal degenerate offense. I'll own up to it. I know it for sure, because the times when I do sit down and listen to music, I'm like, I feel real bad about turning this down. What it is it's a film production thing for me, because I find a lot of films, the background music is very poorly mixed versus the audio. So you'll find yourself struggling to hear what people are saying with films. So it's just a carryover that I just automatically do it with games, which games are never that bad. And it is a shame. But when I actually do sit down and listen to stuff, I'm like, this is really good. And it just lingering in the background, being good, and it never takes away and adds to the experience is fantastic design.
Yeah.
So you said there were some other things besides music you wanted to discuss, Crow?
Yes, absolutely. So in the Mana series, is not just that you're running around in the world saving the world. It's that the world that you're saving is absolutely adorable. All the monsters that you're up against. This one here is a Raybite. All of the the entire world is just a cartoon sort of a place, right? Like, if you want to get from continent A to continent B, the standard thing you do is you load yourself into a cannon and blast yourself off, and you go spiraling all around. You ride on a giant feathered dragon, well, mana beast, but and that dragon has chosen apparently to style its hair to match the hero that is also riding it. For me, that is actually kind of a big reason why I choose the Mana series to come back to rather than a bunch of other games, like just outright violence and darkness just kind of shown in the gritty world that you're living in within the game. That is a little bit of a turnoff for me. Just being in a cheerful, colorful world that whenever you just cartoonishly slash a sword in the direction of a big puffball, it just kind of explodes into a bunch of sparks. Like that's a lot more palatable for me. More fun and whimsical. Where it's like you look at the Mana series, you see a screenshot of any one of the games outside of like the Game Boy ones, because obviously they have a very limited visual cue. Which you look at Mana and you're like, it's probably a Mana game. You look at a Final Fantasy game and you're like,
there's some gray area there.
Yeah, you load up a Dragon Quest series, and up till recently with Akira Toriyama, you're like, that's Dragon Quest, isn't it? And having that like visual through line is very nice to have, especially when it's less of a gritty, serious. Oh, look, it's Final Fantasy 13, where it's really, really overly serious versus like Mana or specifically Visions. You look at it's very whimsical. Even in the start, I'm like, this has that. It's like the demo stuff for like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and then like the tech demo, and then Wind Waker. And Wind Waker has that very specific visual design where it uses the cartoony style. And some people love it, some people hate it, but like, you know what you're getting when you see that, because it's like, this is more fun rather than overly serious. People are dying, and it's like, using the F word every 5 minutes isn't that cool when you think about it.
To be fair and to be clear, there is dark stuff that goes on in the mana games. Like, a very common theme is these people have to sacrifice themselves in order to save the world in some way. And that is, you know, not necessarily a pleasant line of discussion. And in fact, it's right front and center in Visions of Mana, right?
Yeah.
Like, the first
I
thing
booted
you
it
see
up
is,
and I was like, sacrifice ourselves? Whoa, wait a minute. I thought I was in for a fun time. Hold on.
Yeah, so there is a bit of dichotomy on that right in the same game. But yes, it definitely does soften the blow whenever the world generally is much nicer of a place to be sacrificing yourself for. And then obviously there's other plot twists that come through along the way, but yeah, well, that's a discussion per game.
There's something to be said for like that opposition of a more whimsical visual design versus like a more serious tone, where it makes it feels a lot less high stakes, and you can enjoy it a little bit more. And there's something to be said about that whimsical tone where it actually attracts you to the character a little bit more, where you feel more about them rather than, you know, like the visual design of something more realistic can be like, you know, that's the one nice thing with this is it has that whimsical design and it avoids that uncanny valley for the most part, where it's like, yes, this is going to be more of a cartoonish style. So you're not worried about the characters looking too real or not real enough.
Yes.
So it's really interesting that there's so much in the series that kind of pulls people in versus like some of the series can be very disconnected. Final Fantasy like just changes every like decade to something completely different. And this series kind of has that more specific style. I guess since we kind of touched on Visions of Mana, let's go into that a little bit. I'm sure like a lot of people are ask a lot about the new series. What is your experiences with the new Vision series? I guess I'll start with you, Crow, because you did mention playing it and talked about it just a little bit.
So thus far, I'm only about 15 hours into it.
Just 15.
Yeah, just 15 hours, you know, just long enough to have definitely completed the first game of the series and then been thinking about starting another run. Yeah, you know, casually. But yeah, after that amount of time, what I would say is I'm not 100. I was not at start sold on the presentation of the plot. I thought the characters were a little weird about how I thought the game was insistent that every character had to say something profound every scene. And it gets kind of crowded and a little confusing from time to time, and feels pretty stilted. But as you might reasonably guess, in a game where the quest is for all of your party members to die, there's a plot twist at some point. And post plot twist so far, it's been going a lot better on that front. There's more sensible storytelling going on, and because there's more pointed things to be done, it makes more sense for everyone to have their 2 bits about everything that's going on. But plot aside, gameplay, I'm impressed. It superficially, it looks very, very much like Trials of Mana, which is a point in its favor to begin with. It is a action RPG that works a lot in the way that you would expect. So there are a lot more enemies per encounter in this game. It's a lot more opportunities and reasons to knock enemies away either to the side or straight up. And then kind of the core hook for the game is you equip elemental vessels, which each one has some really powerful effect in combat. And just the fact that a character is holding that item defines what their class is overall and what abilities they have access to. So I still don't really, I still will often go through a battle, come out just barely alive at the end and think, I totally botched that one. I could have done that way better. And there was one boss fight in particular where it wasn't actually fighting the boss itself. The boss was summoning wave after wave of lots of enemy things. And I died to it 3 times in a row pretty badly until I regrouped, kind of thought about, okay, what order am I going to use these elemental vessels in order to wipe an entire wave, hopefully by stunning them, and then getting the bonus effect that shows up after you do that. Do I want to be doing magic damage? When do I commit my one class strike that I can reasonably do during a fight? There's a lot of things to juggle, and it is definitely a point in the game's favor that I still feel like I don't have a clear read on whether the thing that I did was what I should have done. There's probably multiple good answers.
Yeah, I find that a lot of time combat can be one of the biggest draws, because I run Remake Rebirth 16, and the combat in 16 is superb, but the story kind of hit or miss for some people. But when you finally get to play the combat, it's fantastic because it has that. And it sounds like that's a similar thing with Visions, where the combat's dynamic in such a way where, like, there's probably like 5 good answers here. I don't think I found one of them, but I won. It's a feeling where you're like, this will be fun to route, where there's going to be a lot of different decisions. And I think that's the one thing with having characters and classes and stuff like that, where you have more of a dynamic choice, so that at least early on, no 2 runs are the same until everybody's like, this is really dominant. But that's good to hear that it has a very dynamic combat system that has me very interested personally. How about your experience with Visions, Alex?
So, to kind of put a general summary over how I feel about Visions, these days, I work in a healthcare field, very busy. If I pick a game, it's usually hey, this is the only game I'm playing. When I'm finished with it, I got to move on to the next one. There's right now, especially in end of August as it was, there's a lot of things that came out, a lot of stuff on the plate.
Yeah.
I got into Visions of Mana going, okay, this series has been hit or miss. I love this series, but I heard there's an open world, a side quest. I just want to play through the game and I want to enjoy it, be done, and I'm sure I will. But I'm not going to bother with side quests. I'm so Square Enix side quested out. There are things like 16. There are times that they do not do side quest well. But I got 7 or 8 hours into the game and realizing, I'm doing every side quest. I'm like, well, I might as well just do that. I expected that game. I'm actually generally curious. I expected the game to take me, 20, 30 hours from what was advertised or what it was supposed to be. I believe I probably spent 90 hours on my first playthrough because the game just absorbed me. Many things that we have talked about with the series of how things they look the same. You look at Final Fantasy, and then you've got Tonberries and other things that, if you're not familiar, look up Final Fantasy 11 Tonberries. Then look up any other Tonberry. Do you look up goblins, even the puddings, like everything else? There's Final Fantasy has, you can tell, that's a Tonberry. That's a Moogle. Even Moogles, they look different from each game.
Yeah.
They change and they evolve. With Mana series, you've got the Rabites, you've got the Mantis Ant, you've got all these other things that you look at and go, oh, all right, boy just got a glow up. This is the Mantis Ant. Vision says the series has never looked better. That game is beautiful. I was just absorbed by the world, and everything but the storytelling really drug me into the game. And I spent a total, actually, oh wow, I'm actually surprised. My first playthrough was 42 hours. And I didn't do everything. There was a point where I stopped doing side quests because I didn't need to anymore. But there is more game to go. And that is considering the first half of the game, I was still playing it pretty fast. Very, very good game. It is the most beautiful the series has ever looked. The music is great. Combat, as Crow was saying, it is, did I do that right? Or there had to have been something. Almost every boss I got out of it, and it wasn't frustrating or I wouldn't say difficult. Aside, there was a couple that was like, oh wow, I died once or twice here in a mana game that wasn't on the Super Nintendo. This is incredible. That was the big part. Is Trials. The issue with that game. Great game. Even on the hard difficulty, it was very easy. This one, there were a couple of times where I was rolling and it seemed like my party was just, absolutely unstoppable. And then all of a sudden, bam, game over. And I thought, what was that? Skunked, yeah. And something just killed me. And I've never been happier to have a game over screen in a game. I was like, yes,
yeah,
they did it. This is so good.
I felt very similar with like Remake, 16, Rebirth. Once, because the way those games are designed is the hard mode is locked to New Game Plus, and the difficulty spikes excessively. Your normal playthrough, you really, if you do any amount of side questing, you really won't get skunked. But when you go into hard, the game's like, you think you know how to play this game. You don't.
Yep.
And I love seeing games like that where the hard is well tuned to the point where it's not excessively unfair, but you need to know what you're doing or you're going to suffer. And that's what hard should be, not just like a mildly more difficult mode, but it's like, no, there's a reason it's called hard. This isn't like suggestively hard. It's actually hard, especially for people that are very knowledgeable with the series where it's like, well, I have all the information. I should just be able to blow through this. And it's like, you're going to have to learn.
And that's, they did that very well with Visions, because throughout the game, the Mana series has a number of games have had kind of a point where it's, here's the world, go out and do. And you have multiple tasks to do and like, okay, let's do it. Usually when the game hits that point, that's also when you start to get your power creeps, and it's just they'd say, here's your elements, here's your team, this is your build, this is how you do it. The series usually has an issue where once you get to that point, the first one or two of those you do, it's that was kind of hard, and then you get to the third one and you just roll them because everything was probably balanced where you could have done that one first, and now that you're doing it third, it's easy. I only had one moment like that where later in the game, I just rolled a boss and thought, oh, that was unfortunate. I get to the next one, and within 5 seconds, my two AI characters died because they got hit by one thing. And that was the main thing with hard is the numbers are tweaked up enough that you got to pay attention. It's not just a snooze fest, hit the buttons and roll it. You need to actually kind of pay attention and strategize of, what am I going to do here? How am I going to respond to the situation? It's this element. How am I going to work with this? You need to put some time and plan into that, or hard mode can hurt. And it doesn't do it so much in a frustrating way. It's just more of a, hey, you're going to get hit really hard. You're going to burn through some consumables. Or if you maybe plan this out and look at what you're fighting and diversify your build enough to respond to different situations, you can make it a little easier. And they did it very well. The difficulty wise, if anyone is worried that this game is just going to be just too easy of a face roll, it isn't. There are plenty of times that it is very easy, but it's never so much that it's like, oh wow, this is just getting boring, I'm just button mashing. No, it never gets like that because the combat is fun enough. And if you
that's very good to hear.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up something not everyone may know about Trials of Mana, the remake. sometime after its initial release, they had a patch that adds a couple of higher difficulty modes to the game. You do have to be playing New Game Plus in order to access them, kind of like what we've seen with some other RPGs. But if you haven't heard of that, that is something to toy with. They didn't necessarily balance that in the way I would have chosen to, but it does add a little bit more replay value to a game that already fundamentally kind of has a lot of replay value. Just the way the game is structured with pick 3 characters out of 6 you could have. Each one has 4 different classes you could choose from. Of all the games of the series, I've probably played that one casually the most times and for the most total time out of any game of the series. Although obviously speedrunning the other ones takes the cake on that.
Yeah, speedrunning can very easily inflate those hours much faster than you expect. It's like, oh, how long have you played Remake? Then you look at your, apparently 1,000? Don't know when that happened, but there you go.
Yeah.
It's good to hear that they have a New Game Plus too, because like hard balancing in New Game is a very, very tightrope. Because the question is, what do you expect the player to have? But with New Game Plus, you're just like, we'll just expect them to have everything. How do we make this difficult?
Yeah.
Because I'd say one of the issues with like Rebirth and Remake, because 16 doesn't have the same gimmick. New Game Plus locks your items. So the gimmick is, how do you stretch your MP that entire chapter? Where magic is incredibly potent, especially in Remake. But when you actually have a more dynamic New Game Plus where it's like, well, you have everything. So it's figuring out how to balance against overwhelming power. Or is it? Right?
Yep.
Go ahead.
That's been a Square Enix staple, and that was something I was worried about with Visions was after it was 16 and the remakes and things. All right, you beat the game. Now here's the hard mode. I really do not like that design, and Square Enix has really doubled down on that. And their side quest design, everything else, there has been a very key factor. But another thing, just if you're worried about Visions, it's very unfortunate for the studio, but whilst I did not know this until I started to play, Square Enix did not develop Visions of Mana. Visions of Mana was made by a Chinese studio that is just completely separate. And as much as I love Square Enix, grew up, love Squaresoft, that's my favorite thing. Maybe it was for the best that they're not the ones who actually developed the game. It was very good. It feels like the Mana series, but it does not have many of Square Enix's modern staples of, hey, you have to beat the game before it's difficult. No, none of that's there.
It's a very fair criticism, honestly. The fact that like normal is really only difficult if you just skip the side quests. Especially in a speedrun, like you can just roll it in easy and you don't have to grind, but normal is really only difficult if you skip stuff purposefully. And it would be nice if we had the easy, normal, hard, and then just had a very hard. I honestly would be a big fan of that, because it is frustrating that like the game is so polarizing in its difficulty, and it's somewhat poorly balanced in such a way where it's like, come back again when you have everything and then we can make this difficult. It's like, but can't we just do this the first time?
Can't you just make it to where I might die a couple of times my first run? And oh, heaven forbid I died a couple of times my first run. It's okay. I'm okay with that. Force me to go, okay, maybe at this hodgepodge build and strategy, maybe I need to think it over again. I'm fine with having to do that. Make me have to do that.
Yeah, we might be showing our video gamer age on this one, of course.
What a boomer take. Well, guess what? We're all boomers. Get over it.
It is.
It's a fair criticism, right? Because games aren't necessarily like the first thing you want is like, well, I want to beat this game without really thinking about it. Wanting to engage in the systems is a fair criticism where it's like, well, boss is weak to ice. Yeah, I just punched it really hard. I didn't use ice. And then you're at that point, you're like, what was the point of making it weak to ice then? I just punched it so hard it died. It's good to hear that Mana has a completely different difficulty curve versus like the 16 and Rebirth. As much as I love the New Game Plus hard, where it like is balanced against having everything, it also leads to kind of a game state where there's not that challenge on the first playthrough unless you like, yeah, I'm just not going to do any of the side quests. That'll make it difficult. And it's like, Remake did it in somewhat a good way where it's like all your cool things were limited by achieving certain gimmick. Like, oh, if you do X things, you get this cool item. So like in the normal any percent run, you limit to do those. In Rebirth, it's like explore the world. Well, what if I don't want to? Have fun.
Are there any games in the Mana series? Like, I guess we've discussed Trials of Mana as a little bit of a exception, but it was also, you know, kind of a different deal because it's a remake. But are there any games of the series that aren't like pretty hard? I feel like at least all the ones I've played kind of were. The
Legend is unfortunately extremely easy, and in response to the chat there, Legend, I'm pretty sure it was the first one to implement actual difficulty settings, but it was also another case of you got to beat the game first. You can get Nightmare mode, which increases enemies levels by like 30, and then No Future mode, which makes every enemy level 99. But the issue there is with how the system works. If you can use it right, you could just go without taking any damage, and the bosses just take 15 minutes to kill. I think with the exception of Mana, the earlier games were quite easy up until you get to that 2006 end of Mana era for a while. The original games were very difficult, but then as it went on, it started to get easier and easier. With, I think, Trials was the big benchmark for things just getting a little too easy, and that's why I was very worried about Visions, because Trials was just simply too easy.
Yeah, the difficulty can be very difficult to balance, like unironically, because like Crisis Core has the same thing where it's like it's normal or hard, but hard is just big numbers go burr, unfortunately. So hearing a game balances like hard mode in a dynamic way where it's less of, well, the enemy just hits harder and has more HP. Don't get hit, forehead. Yep. You know, it's very good to hear that. It's just, I know a lot of people will also may not have heard, but I believe the studio closed down very, very close after release, which is an unfortunate thing.
Yes,
and
like a week after.
Yay, capitalism.
Yeah, it's we are aware of it, and definitely we're not happy to hear that ourselves. But hopefully, the future of the game will continue to evolve, and this is not like the final version of it. But it's good to hear that the product that we got should have enough longevity, regardless of that unfortunate situation, to still have long life. Because it sounds like there's a lot of replayability, and in terms of like a speed run, there's a lot of content to be had.
Yes, I think speedrun wise, once people really break it open, I think Visions is going to be a bit of a Mana revival. I'm hoping it brings a whole lot more people into the series. From both a casual standpoint and speedrun, Visions is very good. And coming from an old curmudgeon of a man sitting on his porch yelling at clouds these days, Visions is very good, and I really, really recommend it.
Since we're coming to a little bit of a close here, is there any things that we didn't touch on that you two would like to discuss towards the end here before we come to a close? We'll start with you, Crow. Sure.
Just one thing that came to mind while I was talking about some of the other things, never just brought it up. The the Game Boy entry of the series, Final Fantasy Adventure, which in Japan it was actually Final Fantasy Gaiden Seiken Densetsu, so it is actually both a Final Fantasy game and a mana game all at once. But the manual for it, the Japanese manual, it has art for all of the enemies and all the bosses. And if you just look at those, it is the same style that we see in all of the other future games. Even though it might be a little hard to squint at the, 16 by 16 pixel grayscale thing and make it out all the time, it really is what was intended for what everything would look like right from the start. So yeah, I actually had never seen the manual until I think about a year ago is when someone just posted it into the Final Fantasy
Discord.
Adventure channel in the Mana series Discord. And yeah, I thought it was adorable.
Yeah, the old manuals versus like nowadays, where it's like it went from being a unique experience to, well, if you have any questions, ask.
If you get a manual at all these days.
Yeah. And then
if you can get one.
And it wrapped back around where some of them do have somewhat unique digital manuals. And the manual is more folded into the game now as like a tutorial segment where they're very extensive, but you have to look for them. It's an interesting experience where we went from bunch to nothing to like it's kind of there but different and unique. Yeah, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about, Alex, before we close up?
My main thing was the series is very diverse. You have every game it feels like a mana game, but everything gives us a little different experience. The main thing I would say, if you're looking to get into the series, is Visions of Mana a good game to get into? Yes, I think Visions of Mana is a great entry point into the series. The reason for that is the writing and the story is debatable. The main thing is you can tell they love the series. There are so many nods and nudges towards old games in the series that if you have never played those games before, you just be like, oh, hey, that's cool. What is this? That's an interesting thing. But if you played it, you go, oh, wow, they remember this little character, this little tiny plot line. They did very well. They added it in there, but it's not overbearing. So I think Visions is a great place to start with. Other than that, I would say the only other one I would say just straight up avoid is the Secret of Mana remake. Even if you have a PS2 and you get your hands on Dawn, go in with a grain of salt and just know it's wacky 2006 experimental fun. But I think if you're looking to get in, you've never played a Mana game before, play Visions. I cannot recommend it enough. It is a wonderful game.
Okay. Channel-wise, Discord-wise, is there anything else you guys want to let people know about so that they have accessibility to information on these speedruns before we close up?
Sure. There is a Mana series Discord. I'm not sure what the best way to post it in to be attached to this podcast is, but it is a very good place to where people like discussing wild stuff about all the games. Activity comes in kind of bursts. There was a really big rush on Final Fantasy Adventure earlier this year. Some time ago, there was a lot more on Secret of Mana. Just kind of varies on where people's attentions are at the time.
And stuff. And I know for Final Fantasy VII, like it's easily accessible through the speedrun.com usually that's a very easy way to find it. You speedrun, look up whatever on speedrun.com, and then you should be able to link through there.
Yeah, and certainly take a look at speedrun.com for the speedruns of all the games of the Mana series. That's where people post that kind of stuff these days, and not everyone does, but I do, and some other people do try to provide commentary while we're just playing through, so you can kind of get used to get a feel for what's actually going on, other than just the wildness of the run itself.
We'll try and make sure that we, if possible, get that linked in the video description as well. So anything else, Alex? Want to make sure that I don't cut you off before we leave.
Nope.
Okay. So that'll be it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion on mana. Thank you, Crow, and thank you, Alex, for your time. Very much appreciate it. And that, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, too, for your time. And
Thanks for having us.
Here. Yep.
Thanks for having us.
Great.
Bye.